single file from the hedge on one side of the road to the embankment on the other. When the mother... Hello dear viewer, take off every zig, Murdoch X here, and today I'll be streaming Flappy Bird for 45 minutes. Why, you ask, would I stream Flappy Bird for 45 minutes? And the answer is an alternate reality game. I'm involved in a few ARGs at the moment, and the one we have to thank for this stream is our Acanthis song. If you like mystery, birds, or emo bands, then check it out. It's all there. Quick shout out to Digit Entity as well. I've been having a good time watching the lore unfold over there. Links in the description. Now, since this stream will be going on for a while, I figured I'd do something to make the audio more interesting. So what I'm doing is I'll be reading The Gates, an apocalyptic novel by Iain Rob Wright. If you enjoy it, please visit his website where he's giving away 5 free books, including this one. I'm a big fan of his works and thought it would be nice to share it with you. Sam and Seasick are my favorite novels of his so far that I've read. Disclaimer, I did not get permission to use this novel in my video, so please forgive me, Mr. Wright, and to everyone else, go to this man's website and check out his books, link in the description. Now, let's go open up the book, and I will begin reading it. Fear on every page, Iain Rob Wright. What will you do when the world ends? The Gates. And, of course, my ebook reader's acting up. There we go. Elizabeth Creasy, Devonshire, England. Elizabeth Creasy froze. The mother bird and her fluffy gray ducklings marched single file from the hedge on one side of the road to the embankment on the other. When the mother noticed Elizabeth and her agitated cocker spaniel, Boise, she picked up speed. Her brood in turn picked up their speed, a cute little army marching on the double. Their feathery advance took them on into the long grass where they promptly disappeared. Elizabeth grinned. Oh, what a lovely day, Boise. Boise looked up, tongue lolling out, but said nothing. It was indeed a lovely day. The greens were green and the sky was as blue as a crystal ocean. If not for a slight thickness to the air heralding a possible storm, it was the perfect afternoon. 2 years retired now, and yet to become restless, Elizabeth's daily jaunts through the fields and farms surrounding her home never failed to exhilarate her. After decades toiling in an office, she'd all but forgotten the benefits of simple fresh air, and it had been an invigorating experience, reacquainting with the joyous beauty of nature. If only her beloved Dennis were still alive to enjoy it with her, but that was not to be. At 58, an aortic rupture had snatched her husband away while he drove his evening bus route. The ensuing low-speed crash had not injured anyone, but Elizabeth had been left with a broken rear window. With a heartbroken widow. That's entirely different than what I just said. She lamented on the time they could have spent together, cuddling in bed all morning and spending the afternoon feeding ducks by the lake. Simple pleasures, sure, but oh, the absolute best. She hadn't been with a man since her beloved Dennis had passed, but Lord knows she had felt the need. Lately, she'd even been considering joining an online dating site just to get a man between her legs. Oh, so much batteries and plastic. Only so much batteries and plastic could do for a woman of her age, and Colin Firth wasn't cutting it anymore. She needed a real man, with real man parts. Up ahead, the little knoll she enjoyed climbing came into view. 12 months ago, the act of hiking up it would have assaulted her knees, but now she could assail it briskly. From atop, she could gaze right across the rolling fields to the sleepy village of Crapstone, where she kept a modest 2-bedroom cottage. The house in Torquay she had shared with Dennis had been too painful to keep, so she'd sold up a year after his death to purchase the cozy home she and Boise now lived in. At the bottom of the hill, she wheezed a little. The muggy weather made it harder to breathe, and she was getting out of breath. Her daily hike would have been a little more leisurely today. You could never be too careful at her age. Come on, Boise, up we go. Obedient as always, her cocker spaniel started up the hill at an ambling pace and matched her own, and together they trampled the thick green grass as they progressed towards the top. Birds chirped, and the sunshine was so potent that it seemed to massage her shoulders with invisible hands. She started singing All Things Bright and Beautiful. Boise barked. Settle down, Boise. I don't want a duet. Boise barked again. Now, Boise, settle down. The cocker spaniel hopped from paw to paw, floppy brown ears twitching. Elizabeth was about to scold him when she saw what had gotten him so worked up. That wasn't there yesterday, was it, boy? The smooth black stone was the size of a football and out of place up on the lonely hill. No other rocks or boulders lay around, and certainly none that were jet black like this one. It more resembled volcanic glass than anything she could have found in the English countryside. If not for the delicate gray veins snaking over its surface, it could have been an old-fashioned bowling ball or one of those cartoon bombs with fuses and Acme written on the side. The closer she got to it, the less smooth the stone appeared. Like how a television picture degraded when you got right up in front of the screen. Boise tugged on his lead. Hard enough, he almost yanked free of her grasp. She gave it a swift tug and brought the Cocker Spaniel back to heel. "Behave, Boise. What's got into you?" He's a British author. These should all be in a British voice, but I'm not going to do that. The bird stopped chirping, and the warmth of the sun disappeared, yet it was still so muggy that it was hard to take a breath. A distant roll of thunder, but not a single cloud hanging in the sky. Elizabeth's eyes fixed on this strange black stone. The word obsidian popped into her mind. She reached out and touched it, not knowing why, other than something inside of her demanded it. Her fingertips were just about to make contact when Boise bit her. "Damn it!" The leash slipped out of her grasp, and Boise fled, running down the hill, full pelt like a greyhound chasing a rabbit. "Boise, come back here." Damn it! Her hand throbbed something terrible. A purplish-blue blotch forming where the one long canine had crushed her skin. Boise had never snapped at her like that before. Never. What had gotten into him? Then came the pain. Thwump, thwump, thwump. Elizabeth turned and clutched her forehead. The delicate gray veins on the stone's surface had started to pulse and vibrate. It was calling out to her. She could not help herself. She reached out, pressed her fingertips against the stone. Ice cold, like running her hand down the inside of a fridge. It felt wrong, unnatural. Elizabeth was just about to pull away when something seized her. Her fingertips fused against the stone's icy surface, a powerful force snatching her mind and showed her unbelievable things. Distressing images seared themselves into her soul and boiled the blood in her veins. She saw horrors, exquisite tortures of the worst kind. A vast legion of monstrous creatures. She saw hell. The pictures in Elizabeth's mind were so wondrous and terrifying that her eyeballs melted inside her skull and leaked down her cheeks while her heart burst in her chest like a pinpricked balloon. When her 67-year-old body slumped to the ground, it was an empty husk, and her days of ambling through fields were over. Her retirement irrevocably ended. The cold black stone went back to sleep. Rick Bastian, Devonshire, England. When Rick's song came on the radio, he winced and pulled out the plug. Few things upset him more than carrying his number one hit, Cross to Bear. It was fingernails on a blackboard, and its title had become more than a little apt. Its existence was his cross to bear. Sitting in the kitchen of his vast country home, he poured himself another whiskey and switched on the wall-mounted television. Evening had not yet arrived, and the only programs airing were a couple of convoluted quiz shows and a mock court case with a Judge Kettleby. Today, the gesticulating, gavel-wielding case heard about a stolen Xbox. Riveting stuff. Rick slid off his stool and took his whiskey into the living room, where he ambled over the sleek black piano in the corner. Despite the melancholic feelings playing always stirred in him, he never lost affection for his beloved parlor grand. He'd saved 6 long years for it back in the days before he'd acquired his fortune. The sense of achievement of finally making enough money to buy a beautiful instrument had made him cherish it even more. Now he could buy a piano worth twice as much, but it wouldn't mean half so much. Sitting down at the piano, Rick placed his whiskey on the coaster already on the shiny black lid. His fingers began to play automatically, House of the Rising Sun. Closing his eyes, he slipped away and became a vessel through which the music flowed. It was impossible not to smile against the hunting onslaught of well-played piano music. It was that feeling of peace and calm that he felt as he caressed the keys that had first attracted him to the music industry. Life contained so much misery, so if he was going to devote his life to something, it would be this, creating beauty with his fingertips. A bum note. He lifted both hands away from the keys in horror. The uninvited C major had been unmistakable. His ears did not lie. The doorbell rang again. He sighed. He hadn't played a bum note after all. Someone had pressed the doorbell in the midst of his playing. He leapt up with a grunt. Unannounced visitors were not something he often received, thanks to the imposing iron gate that stood at the end of his long gravel driveway. He had no idea who would be calling on him now. The security panel in the entrance hallway illuminated, and the CCTV-controlled video feed had activated. The LCD monitor showed a man outside, dressed in a suit and tie, despite the balmy weather. Rick activated the intercom and spoke into the microphone. "Who is it?" The suited gentleman spotted the CCTV camera and waved. "Don't you recognize your own brother? That tiny bit of fame must have gone to your head." Rick groaned. "Long time no see, Keith. Come on in." What the hell was his brother doing here? He pressed the gate release and then went and unlocked the front door. He waited on the front step while a burgundy Range Rover crunched up his pebbled driveway. It had been an age since he and Keith had seen each other, so this unexpected visit was rather unexpected. The Range Rover pulled up next to Rick's imported Mustang in front of the property's detached double garage, where Keith switched off the engine and got out. He looked smug and proud for no reason, but that was ordinary for him. "Hello, brother," he said. "Nice motor," said Rick. "I remember you always wanted a Range. Best thing England ever made. Got her last year after a particularly lucrative month." He patted the bonnet lovingly, then shot a thumb at Rick's sky blue 2009 Mustang. "I don't know how you came to drive that foreign abomination." Seemed a good purchase at the time. Truth was, Rick had never been much of a car fanatic and only got the American import because it felt like something rich people did. For the amount he drove it had been a waste of money, but it was nice to look at and roared like a dragon on the highways. Keith didn't wait to be invited. He stepped through the doorway into the entrance hall, where he glanced around nosily. "Place is a little big for you, isn't it?" Rick glanced at his property and considered the truth of it. The Edwardian mansion, with its rough stone floors and gnarled mahogany beams, was perhaps a trifle grand for a single, essentially unemployed man, but it was also the only thing that reminded him of the success he'd once been. Win or lose, he'd made enough money to live in a mansion house like this. He shrugged. "I like it here. Doesn't feel so big after a while." Keith nodded but said nothing. They both went into the living room, which was modern compared to the rest of the lower floor, which still retained its Edwardian charms. They gave each other an awkward hug. "It's good to see you, Keith. Take a seat. I'll get you a drink." "Nothing for me, thanks. Marcy and I don't touch alcohol these days." "Really? Good on you both." Despite his brother's refusal, Rick went and retrieved his whiskey from the piano and gulped it down, then poured himself a fresh measure from the bottle in the kitchen. Back in the living room, he found Keith spread out on the couch like it was his own. Rick perched on the other couch. "So you really don't drink?" "Well, you know how it is. We don't want to raise Maxwell thinking that booze is an ordinary part of life." "You mean like Dad raised us?" "Oh, come on, Rick. Dad was never as horrid as you make him out. You'd gone to university by the time he was really bad. I was 13. I'm the one who got to see the bastard he turned into. I'm the one who got to watch him knock Mum around." Keith sighed. "Mum and Dad's marriage was nothing to do with us. Anyway," Rick changed the subject, "how is Maxwell? He must be, 4 by now?" 4 in October. He'll be starting school soon, though I think he's ready now. He's so smart, Rick. I tell you, he'll be Prime Minister one day. Must take after you. You've always been driven." Keith looked smug, and Rick chided himself for needing his brother's ego. Rick would be king of the universe, and Keith wouldn't give him the slightest congratulations, so why was he throwing his brother a bone? Rick still remembered the look of devastation on Keith's face when he'd signed his record deal. No happiness, no pride in his younger brother's accomplishment, just resentment and anger. Rick became the rich and successful brother, and Keith detested it. When it had all inevitably gone down the pan, Keith's transparent glee almost ended their relationship. Perhaps it should have, but Rick had allowed himself to fall back into the old routine. Keith turning up his nose at everything he did, and him trying to act like he didn't notice. "So why are you here, Keith? I haven't seen you in over a year, since Tabitha got married." "Tabby's already divorced. I could have told you it was on the cards the moment they said their vows. He was a carpenter." Rick frowned. "So? Just saying. Chap doesn't have much going on. Tabby wanted more." "She told you that, did she?" Keith shrugged. "It was obvious." "So why are you here?" Rick demanded. "Not to talk about our cousin's divorce, I'm sure." "Can't I just drop by to see my little brother? I wanted to check in on you. Make sure you hadn't hanged yourself in this big empty mansion." "Why would I hang myself?" "Because, well, you know." "What? Because I lost my record deal and haven't been able to get another one? Or because they make funny videos on the internet about how cheesy my one and only hit song was?" Rick Astley called me the other day and thanked me for replacing him. Should I just hang myself? I never said that. Rick knocked back his whiskey and went to get another one. Maybe I'll kill myself when the money runs out. Fortunately, I made a shitload of it, so that will probably never happen. At least I'm a stinking rich failure, huh? Rick, come on. Rick stormed off into the kitchen. Once he poured himself a fresh drink, he placed his elbows on the counter and held his head in his hands. If Keith thought he was depressed, it was because he damn well was. Suicide, though, had never crossed his mind. As much as he hated the sour turn his life had taken, he had made it once. He'd been top of the charts and saw his face printed on the cover of Rolling Stone magazines. Most musicians only dreamt of getting a shot like that, and whether it had lasted or not, Rick had been lucky. For that reason alone, he was proud. It was just difficult finding a self-respect when you were a one-hit wonder. If a man made a fortune by selling a business and retiring at 30, he was forever successful. But if a musician got rich off of one song and then hung up his guitar, he was a joke. His short career became a punchline. People enjoyed watching celebrities fall. It was modern blood sport. And while Rick had been a celebrity for all of 5 minutes, he had fallen hard. Grisly scene discovered just outside Devonshire village of Crapstone. Keith walked into the kitchen. Hey, Rick, I'm sorry if I upset you. Quiet a second. They're talking about something that's happened in Crapstone. That's only a few miles from here. Keith pulled up a stool next to Rick, and they both watched the television while the news report continued. There was a female reporter standing at the base of a grassy hill, surrounded by police tape. Several men and women in latex gloves hurried around, working on something out of sight. Atop this small hill, the body of pensioner Elizabeth Creasy, a retired local businesswoman, was found dead, her eyes badly mutilated, and what police are suspecting was a premeditated and personal attack. Rick scrunched up his face. Poor lady. She must have annoyed the wrong person, said Keith. Most bizarre, the reporter continued, is the presence of a bizarre object found beside the crime scene. A smooth black stone was discovered right next to Miss Creasy's body, but all attempts so far to collect it have failed. In fact, several attempts to interact with the stone have resulted in further casualties, as 2 police officers, first to arrive on the scene, both suffered fatal injuries shortly upon touching the object in question. A team of geologists from the University of Exeter are now examining the stone, but their initial studies are yet to provide any insight into its nature. Police are hesitant to draw any conclusions, but this has been a strange and brutal attack in one of the country's most idyllic locations. I'm Kimberly Wilkins, back to the studio. Rick pulled a face. Horrible. Keith shrugged. Somebody mutilated her eyes, Keith. I don't know how any person can. He sighed and took a nip of whiskey. And that stone they were talking about, they said they couldn't collect it. What does that even mean? That it's heavy, who cares? Rick wasn't sure why he cared. Perhaps it was because he often felt so isolated and vulnerable here on his own. He sometimes lay in bed at night hearing noises and worrying about robbers creeping around downstairs. That might be why the thought of an old lady being mutilated and murdered just miles away from his home was more than a little unnerving. I just found the whole thing sad, he said. Why would someone do that to a pensioner? Keith chuckled. You always think too much, Rick. I remember when our dog Cassie died, you cried in your room for a week. You were such a funny child. Rick topped off his whiskey and exhaled into the glass and took another long swig. He clonked his empty glass down on the counter and took a moment to study his older brother, a slightly plumper, slightly balder version of himself. His previously jet black hair had lightened towards gray and his nose seemed bigger. What do you want, Keith? Will you tell me why you're here? I know it's not because you missed me. Keith rubbed his hand against his stubbled chin. It was unlike him to be clean-shaven. Maybe I should have that drink after all, Rick. I'll have whatever you're having. Rick poured his brother whiskey and a fresh glass and slid it towards him. Why are you here, for God's sake? Will you just tell me? Keith wrapped his fingers around the whiskey glass and stared down at the oak-colored contents. Because I have no place else to go. I need to stay here tonight, Rick. Maybe for a while. Rick closed his eyes. He could not have gotten a worse answer. Mina Magar, Oxford Street, London. Come on, Mina, shouted David. We need to get there before the others. There won't be room to swing your elbow soon. I need those shots. Mina kept a firm grip on her camera and fought to keep up. She was 15 years younger than David, but when there was a story to be had, the man could move like the wind. His yellow hair flowed behind him like a thoroughbred's mane, and he slipped through the crowd like water through a sieve. All Mina caught were brief flashes of his argyle socks. She, meanwhile, bumped into people almost every step and received more than a few dirty looks. She couldn't help but apologize profusely. Even on a slow day, Oxford Street was one of the busiest spots in London, and today people were teeming through it like ants. They packed together in small groups, lining the road on both sides. The police were massively outnumbered and struggled to maintain order. The large gathering lacked the festival spirit of, say, a royal wedding, and instead held an atmosphere more akin to a kindling riot. People had a look of mischief about them, and several lampposts were skewed as people hung off them like chimps. David shouted again, "Come on, Mina. I can see those buggers from the Chronicle are already here. We can't let them hog the headlines." Mina fiddled, and I forgot to mute my computer. That should help. Where are we at? See, they're in order. Large wedding, kindling. People look around them, and several mischief lamp posts were skewed as people hung off them like chimps. David shouted again, "Come on, Mina. I can see those buggers from the Chronicle are already there. We can't let them hog the headlines." Mina fiddled with her camera while trying to run. She wanted to have the settings ready for when she started snapping. Her pictures could be used in the Slough Echo. I don't know how to pronounce that. Slough? S-L-O-U-G-H. The Slough Echo. But if she produced something noteworthy, it might spread to bigger outlets or even go viral. Maybe if she achieved that, her father would finally see she was good at her job and stop telling her to quit all the time. And I gotta pause for just a moment. Okay. Not looking where she was going, Mina collided with the square back of a man. The shaved head turned around and glared at her. Watch where you're fucking going, love." Mina backed up. "Sorry, I'm so sorry." When she heard the man mutter the words "fucking Paki," she was stunned. How dare he? She wasn't even from Pakistan. How could people be so hateful? "Come on," David shouted for the third time. "Get moving." Mina wanted to say something back to the snarling racist, but instead she ended up smiling nervously and moving on. Much as she would have liked to confront him, she wasn't that person. Even the thought made her stomach churn, so she put the experience behind her and focused on her job. "I'm right behind you, David," she shouted as she dodged around a woman with a pram, loaded it with the shopping bags instead of a child. Up ahead, the historic Selfridges building loomed unhappily. Its sleek interior was devoid of shoppers, as the bus shelter out front had been smashed and twisted by enthusiastic oglers trying to climb it. David pointed ahead, still dodging through the crowd with fluid ease. "We need to hurry. Come on. We can't afford to miss anything." "I'm right behind you," she shouted, even though she was 6 steps back. They were headed for the Soho Street intersection on the east end of Oxford Street, but they had been forced to get off the tube at Bond Street, and Oxford Circus and Tottenham Court Road were closed. It was a long walk in a normal day, but today was a nightmare. It was like squeezing through a corridor of hot, sweaty people, and then she saw Newman Street coming up on her left. She let out a moan of joy. There was only one street away. They were only one street away. "There, I see it," David shouted. Sorry. Something came up. I just need to send a quick message. And I lost where it was at. Wonderful. That's okay. I'll find it. Oh, yeah, David shouted. Mina caught up to him and saw it too. They had arrived at a police cordon outside McDonald's. A dozen scientists milled around inside the tape as if they hadn't even noticed the 1,000-strong mob surrounding them. They were focused on the strange black stone, curiosity at the forefront of their minds. Mina was fixated on it too, surprised at how unremarkable it was. Since the first stone had been discovered last night in the village of Crapstone, hundreds more had materialized. Businesses began as usual that morning in the city of London, but it soon became evident that something strange was afoot. At 7:30, a double-decker bus had struck a bowling ball-sized stone in the center of Oxford Street and broken its axle. The driver got out to investigate and died of a massive and explosive heart attack a second after touching it. News circulated rapidly after that, panic spreading thick and fast. Identical stones appeared all over the United Kingdom, from Inverness to Plymouth to Norwich to Hull and Glasgow too. Wales had identified more than a dozen within its borders. Word spread that anyone who touched the stones would immediately die of a heart attack, and that had been the nugget of news to set the nation on edge. The stones were a threat. Public alerts were issued. Do not approach the stones and report any discoveries immediately. A hotline was set up too, plastered at the bottom of every news port. New discoveries came in every minute. The stones were everywhere. "It's just a rock," Mina heard the disappointment in her voice as she spoke. "I was expecting something more. I don't know. It's just a rock." A leathery-skinned old woman grabbed Mina's arms, madness in her rheumy eyes, and barked at her. "It's aliens. They've sent hundreds of meteors to Earth to colonize us. That stone is gonna crack open like a coconut and spill its load into the atmosphere. You mark my words. We're all dead." Mina yanked her arm away and rubbed the finger marks left on her skin. She clung to David, but he paid no attention. He paid her no attention, focused only on making it past the police cordon. Mina covered her mouth in shock when she saw him knee a child out of the way. The little boy fell to his knees, got up, and went crying to his mummy, arms outstretched and begging to be picked up. "David, you just hurt a child." The brat shouldn't have been in the way. "Ah, here we are, finally." They made it over to a burly police sergeant with a clipboard in his hands. He was grinding his teeth and taking slow, deep breaths. His eyes examined David and Mina with suspicion. "Stand back, please." "We're with the Slough Echo," David snapped. The sergeant ran a finger down his clipboard and nodded. "Okay, step inside the cordon, but don't go within 6 feet of the object." David swooped beneath the police tape without another word. Mina took a moment to thank the sergeant before doing the same. The black stones set in the middle of the road. Mina's tummy churned. It wasn't hunger. She'd grabbed a hot dog less than an hour ago. It was something else. The mysterious object just 10 feet away from her had killed people. It was dangerous. She'd been so intent on getting to Oxford Street that she'd not stopped to consider the peril she was placing herself in. Had the stone been tested for radioactivity, toxicity? Was she in danger just by being close to it? The dozen scientists surrounding the thing did little to assuage her fears. A tug at her arm pulled her away from her fears. It was David. "Get snapping, girl." "Yes, right." Mina raised her camera and started snapping away, altering and fine-tuning her settings as she went. It was difficult to know how the best photograph would look until she examined the digital reel on her laptop, so she followed the photojournalist's credo and just kept on snapping. The more pictures she took, the better the chances of getting something valuable. Different angles, different settings, different lenses, but just keep snapping. David interviewed the police officers, scribbling away furiously on his notepad while they spoke. Normally he would use a tape recorder, but police officers were notoriously shy around recording equipment, and they gave much more away when faced with a simple pencil and pad. While Mina tried to do her job, a pushy photographer from the Chronicle fought with her for the best angles, hustling her out of the way so often that it almost felt malicious. Mina knew she would hustle the older man right back, but it wasn't something she was used to. The other woman carried herself with such confidence, authority that it was hard to resist her. The police officers all smiled and chatted with her, while they had only disapproving glances for Mina. She started to wonder if she would ever find her feet in this job. Satisfied that she had got as much as she was going to get, Mina placed her spare lenses back into her hip bag and her camera hanging around her neck. Now that she no longer stared through a viewfinder, the black stone in the center of the cordon seemed to be alive. Less a detached photographic subject and more an imposing presence that demanded attention. From 6 feet away, she could see that the surface of it was not jet black, but streaked with delicate gray veins. She wondered what it would feel like if she touched it. It could kill her, she knew that, so why was she eager to approach it? It was that same feeling she got whenever she stood on a high balcony and peered over the edge. That same voice in her head that always dared her to jump. Just do it. A batch of shouting broke out behind Mina and made her turn around. The burly sergeant who stood outside the cordon had dropped his clipboard and begun fighting with a lad in a red hoodie. A skinny girl batted the sergeant with both fists, yelling at him to leave her boyfriend alone. The profanity she used was impressive. The sergeant applied a headlock, yanking the lad around. "I told you to bloody get back." The lad twisted and squirmed, trying to break free. "You have no right, pig. People deserve to know what's happening." The sergeant released the lad's neck and shoved him backwards. "Move away or I'll bleed and place you under arrest." "Fuck you, pig," the girlfriend shouted. "Go suck a dick," said the lad. "Okay, that's it." The sergeant reached into his belt and pulled a canister of CS gas. He pressed the nozzle and gave the young man a full dose in the face and sent him stumbling backwards, coughing and sputtering. The lad's girlfriend seemed like a tomcat and pounced on the sergeant with her claws out. The sergeant restrained her easily with his meaty arm and let her have a dose of CS gas too. She fell to the floor weeping and scratching at her eyes. The crowd ignited in anger. Hundreds of yelling voices merged into one, singularly accusatory howl. "Nazi," someone shouted. "Fucking pig," came another. The sergeant went on his radio, calling for backup. But before he got a call through, someone threw a milkshake that exploded against his chest and covered him in a pink mess. His face grew red with fury, and he started throwing punches at whoever was near. The lad in the red hoodie was pulled back by the paternal crowd, which then surged forward as a single massive organism. Mina winced as she saw the same snarling racist who called her Packy punch the sergeant in the face. The loud crack was like a cricket ball hitting a bat, but the stunned police officer remained on his feet and continued swinging his fists madly, but it was a battle lost before it had already begun. The crowd dragged the sergeant down to the ground, and the racist thug kicked his head like a football. Somebody else stomped on his testicles. Mina was glad the sergeant was unconscious through most of it. She was also glad she had not confronted the racist. That could have been her head being kicked like a football. The two police officers within the cordon raced to their colleague's aid, but could not get near. The crowd was a pack of lions guarding its prey until it was well and truly dead. "We need to go," said David, clutching Mina's arm. We need to help." "No, we need to get out of here before they do the same to us." Mina shook her head. "Why would they attack us?" "Because we're on this side of the cordon. Now come on." Mina allowed herself to be dragged, but found herself unable to take her eyes off the black stone. She got the feeling it was staring right back at her. Police cars raced down Oxford Street, sirens blaring, but they had to stop when they encountered the thick mass of bodies. Within seconds, the squad cars tilted and rocked as people laid siege to the trapped officers. The windscreens cracked as police climbed up on the bonnets, and within seconds, the police cars had disappeared into a sea of bodies. "This is insane," said Mina. "They're acting like animals. Just keep moving and don't make eye contact. Things are about to get nasty." "They're already nasty." David grabbed her arm and pulled her close. "People are afraid, Mina, and when people are afraid, their inner caveman comes out. There's no rationality in a man when he panics. Just keep your head down and do not stop moving." Mina dodged around an old woman who had fallen in the road. She wanted to stop her, but the crowd was a living thing and swallowed the pensioner up before there was any chance to offer help. David dragged Mina beneath the awning of French Connection to catch a breath. "What do we do, David?" "We wait for the first gap in the crowd, and then we get the hell out of this city." "David, there are hundreds of these stones. What if this is happening everywhere?" "There are thousands of them," he corrected her. "You were there when Carol got the report. Thousands of them all over the world. I don't think I understood the chaos that they would cause until now. Hundreds of years ago, people's superstitions kept them in line. Now, in an age of science, people don't tolerate things they can't understand. Until someone makes sense of these stones, they are going to get ghastly." Mina swallowed. "I'm afraid, David." "So am I, but there will be time to be afraid later. We need to get out of here. And then what? We give the public the news and hope they don't riot." Tony Cross, Iraq-Syria border. The patch of scrub desert at the Iraq-Syria border was the worst hell British Army Staff Sergeant Tony Cross had ever visited, and he'd visited many. The air was so arid that it seemed to dry you out from within, and every breath was like swallowing sand. And then there was the isolation. Nothing but sand, rubble, and rocks for 100 miles in every direction. The nearest town was Rutba, but the people there were as frightened of British soldiers as they were of the fanatical members of ISN, Islamic State nationalists. They feared the West because they might be accused of being in league with terrorists, and they feared the ISN because they might be accused of being in league with the West. The ordinary people of Iraq were perpetual victims of religion and money, and neither served them well. Tony felt sorry for them in the same way he felt sorry for cows in the field. They didn't realize how much their lives were not their own. Lieutenant Ellis stood with his hands on his hips and stated the obvious. Looks like this fence has been tampered with. The gap in the border fence was 20 meters wide, and either end of it had been rolled aside so neatly that they resembled a pair of decorative pillars. Sabotage, but from which side? What are you thinking, Staff Sergeant? Lieutenant Ellis asked Tony, no doubt noticing his dubious expression. How far away is the border crossing? 2 miles? 3? The only way the Iraqi guard didn't notice a giant hole in the fence is because they're either useless or they're letting ISN stroll right on through. Ellis stiffened. We can make no such assumptions. The Iraqi National Force were trained by our soldiers. They know what is at stake. Do they? To me, their choice is pretty simple. Side with a group of men with the same religion and color skin as them, or with a bunch of rich white Westerners with avarice behind their smile. Avarice? I don't know what that word is. A-V-A-R-I-C-E, avarice. Ellis strolled up to Tony and lifted his chin in a way the pompous git probably thought was authoritative. Now look here, Staff Sergeant. I will not have you criticizing our operations here. You have made it quite clear that your feelings on our duties in this part of the world, and since I have served nowhere near as long as you have, I will reserve my judgment, but please keep your disenfranchisement to yourself. The men need not hear it. We are here to do a job, so lead the moral quandaries to the politicians. That's the last bunch of crooks I'd leave it to. Ellis placed his hands on his hips. Am I understood, Staff Sergeant? Perfectly, sir. Good. We can be fairly certain that this is the ingress point from Syria to Iraq, so our mission is planned. We set up here and ambush the next group that tries to come through. I don't think it's necessarily the best course of action, sir. Oh, why not? Tony told him, the first set of rebels we fall upon might be a bunch of wet-eared kids. We should hold off until we identify a high-value target. And allow members of ISN to funnel through in the meantime? No, I'm afraid not. We are here to shut down this security breach for the Iraqi government, and that is what we will do. We engage the first border jumpers we see, and then we get the fence repaired. Tony didn't waste time arguing. This 26-year-old fresh out of Sanford Academy thought he knew everything and wouldn't bend from what he thought was best. He wasn't the first arrogant little twerp to give Tony orders, and it was just part of the job. In the older days of wars, Ellis might have gotten a bullet in the back, but those times were over. As they were carrying out a pretty low-risk mission in a conflict they were not officially allowed in, Tony's only concern was keeping the lads from doing mischief. Ellis could play the simpering peacock as much as he wanted. Tony snapped off a half-assed salute. I'll get the men dug in just behind the hill, sir. I'll keep us well hidden until the time is right. Excellent. See to it, Staff Sergeant. Tony marched away, leaving the lieutenant to stand in his hands glued to his hips. The young officer's expression made it look like he was planning to campaign to rival D-Day, but the truth was that there was probably very little going on inside his skull. With all the British Army's great progress into the modern fighting force it was today, it was still top-heavy with entitled idiots from military families and well-bred fools looking for a jolly old jaunt in the forces. The real leaders of the army were the sergeants like him. Tony flagged down one of his corporals, a young scouser named Green. Like his name suggested, he was a little inexperienced, but he was also bright and eager, which counted for a lot here in the wastelands. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Yes, Staff Cross. Do you have orders? Get 4 men to dig a defensive trench on the rear of that hill. He pointed it to the gentle slope that formed a moderate peak. We'll dig in with a lookout position at the top. We'll see any border jumpers long before they see us. Have Corporal Rose help you. Right away, Staff Cross. Green marched away at the double, gathering men as he went. There were 15 of them assembled at the border, split off from a platoon of 200 stationed at a temporary camp 50 miles away. Britain had decided not to take direct action in the Syrian conflict or commit itself to any land wars, but it had compromised upon a small reactionary force to operate within friendly Iraq. Any border jumpers could be dealt with as criminals rather than terrorists, and that made things less politically precarious. After the decade-long nightmare of Al-Qaeda, Britain did not want to draw the ire of another extremist group. It It might have held an obligation to keep Iraq free of dangerous individuals, but it held no such responsibilities to Syria. Damascus could burn for all Westminster cared as long as it was down to Syria's people or Syria's government. Tony didn't particularly disagree. How could the Arab nations ever hope to evolve and pull themselves up out of the dirt if the West interfered every time a government was threatened? There would be no United States if some disenfranchised Brits hadn't stuck their fingers up to the crown. There would be no democracy in Britain if not for Cromwell and his armed uprising. People needed to overthrow governments and take control of their own destinies. The rest of the world should stand back and let them. The Arab Spring movement was the Middle East's first step towards positive change. Worst thing to do now would be to try to manipulate things from Washington, London, and Brussels. Not that Tony had any respect for the ISN. Like all fanatics, they were monsters hiding behind ideals and traditions they deserved whether they got it, but it was for the Arab world to deal with them. Only through their own trials and triumphs would the people of the Middle East gain the confidence needed to unite against extremism and join the rest of the world on equal footing. While Private Green carried out his orders, Tony took a trek up the hill to double-check that it was indeed a suitable location to siege and ambush. The elevation alone should give them a better end of a firefight, but it never hurt to know the terrain. For instance, as he stood up the gentle incline now, he noticed that the ground underfoot was loose. It would become tough to see if a sudden gust swept dirt up into the air. The last thing the men needed during a battle was a face full of sand. It might be worth building a windbreakers out of any larger rocks they could find. So Tony set about looking for those rocks. There were numerous fist-sized boulders, but few that were large enough to provide cover. The unit had brought jeeps with them, hidden nearby under sandy traps for about half a mile back. So it was possible to make a quick recce, R-E-C-C-Y, I don't know that word. So it was possible to make a quick recce to see what lay in the surrounding area, but before he had properly considered doing that, he spotted a large stone up ahead, a jet black boulder completely out of place amongst the browns and grays of the desert. In fact, it looked very much like it had been placed there. Tony squinted and muttered to himself, "What the hell is that thing?" "Incoming," came a squawk through the radio. Tony dropped onto one knee and swung his rifle up and around. Private Harris, a large brute of a man, and the group's lookout pointed toward the Syrian border. Lieutenant Ellis rushed to the bottom of the hill and signaled the men to gather up, but as Tony was on higher ground, he stayed right where he was. Ellis realized that the staff sergeant was in a better position and instead rallied the men to Tony's location. "Who's coming? How many? And which direction?" Tony asked Private Harris before Ellis had time to interject. "Vehicles. I counted 4. 3 cars, 1 van. "Dear Lord," said Ellis, "that's quite the convoy." Tony faced his commanding officer with urgency. "We should get the men behind the hill and call into the command." "Yes, of course. Everybody from a firing line behind the hill and await my orders." When the lieutenant did nothing else, Tony frowned at him. "Are you going to call commander, sir? Are you going to call command, sir?" "No, it's unnecessary until we know what we're up against." "When we know what we're up against, it'll be too late." "Nonsense. I don't want to put a call through to command without good reason." "There